I've been sitting with this for a few days now, trying to figure out how to say it without it sounding like a headline. Something shifted this week, not in the way things usually shift, the slow drift you only notice in retrospect. This was more like watching a table crack while everyone's still eating dinner. Let me just walk through what happened, because I think the details matter more than the framing. The Trump administration launched military operations against Iran. The Strait of Hormuz, that narrow corridor that something like a fifth of the world's oil passes through, is effectively closed right now. Markets are rattled. American service members are being killed. 13 confirmed dead as of this writing, more wounded. And then, on the same week, the U.S. Treasury quietly issued a 30-day waiver allowing countries to buy Russian crude. Quietly. Except Friedrich Merz found out about it the morning it happened. And he didn't quietly absorb it. He stood next to Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney in front of cameras and said, plainly, 6 of the 7 G7 nations had reached a consensus that sanctions on Russia should stay. And then America went the other way, alone, without telling anyone. He didn't accuse. He didn't raise his voice. He just documented it. Out loud. That's the part I keep coming back to. There's a version of this story that's about the specific decisions. The Iran strikes, the sanctions waiver, the redeployment of the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit from Japan to the Middle East, the THAAD missile components being pulled out of South Korea without prior notice. Each of those is significant on its own. But what I think is actually happening is something quieter and more structural. Countries that have spent decades organizing their national security, their energy policy, their trade relationships around the assumption of American reliability are now, publicly, on camera, beginning to ask whether that assumption still holds. Japan's prime minister made it clear Japan won't be sending its self-defense forces anywhere near this operation. South Korea is watching missile defense equipment get packed up and shipped out of their country. Equipment they paid an enormous diplomatic price with China to accept in the first place. Taiwan has watched promised military aid get withheld. Japan watched the forces specifically trained to defend the Pacific get redirected to a different theater. These aren't just policy grievances, they're lessons. And lessons don't unhappen. What Merz and Carney did is interesting to me strategically. They didn't retaliate, they didn't threaten. They built a record, a calm, multilateral, credibility-laden paper trail of an alliance being overridden by one of its own members. You only do that if you're planning to use it later. You only do that if you're already mentally preparing for a world where you have to navigate around the current configuration of American leadership rather than depend on it. I think there are a few ways this plays out from here. One is a managed cooling, some face-saving framework, a ceasefire, a reset. The fractures get papered over. But here's the thing about that scenario. The alternative channels, the bilateral relationships, the independent defense frameworks that countries are quietly building right now, those don't disappear just because the immediate crisis eases. They become the new infrastructure. Hedging, once built, tends to stay built. The second is a broader realignment where middle powers watch Germany, Canada, Japan, and Brazil each independently hedge and conclude that this is simply the new normal. The result isn't an anti-American world, it's just a less America-centric one. And once that shift gets locked into trade agreements, energy deals, and defense pacts, it becomes self-sustaining. The third scenario is the one nobody wants to say out loud, that the response to Allied criticism is to treat it as betrayal, to punish dissenters, to escalate. That path leads somewhere nobody has a clean map for. The question I keep sitting with isn't really about this week, it's about what comes after. Even if everything de-escalates tomorrow, the lesson has already been absorbed. That security commitments can be reversed without notice. That strategic logic can change week to week. That a consensus among 6 allies can be overridden in a single morning. You can't unknow that. Once you've learned it, you build accordingly. Germany won't go back to full strategic dependency. Canada won't go back to quiet deference. Japan won't assume the Pacific commitment is permanent. The United States didn't lose its alliance architecture to some coordinated adversarial campaign. It seems to be losing it through a series of decisions that kept signaling to allies, your concerns are secondary, your contributions are assumed, your security is conditional. Friedrich Merz is a careful man. He knows exactly what he's